Thank you for the
Okay.
time, Alex. Appreciate it, man.
You're welcome, Mike. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Lots to get into in a little bit of time. So want to get into the Metal Allegiance, of course, and
Hmm.
talk a little NAMM and some other stuff you got going on. Talk a little Testament as well. But
Absolutely.
let's start with the Metal Allegiance thing. It's the first time since 2020. Certainly, COVID played a big part in screwing up the NAMM schedule. Did you go to the other NAMMs? Did you go to the summer and the spring versions of NAMM?
Yeah, the last NAM I went to was 2020,
Oh wow.
and it was so early in 2020. You know, COVID was a not even a blip on the radar screen, um, but it would change in a very short time.
Well, I'm glad it's
But
finally back.
I haven't been to any of the others. I mean, obviously it was canceled the next year.
Right.
And then they sort of did these mini NAMs and these NAMs at different times of the year. And I never went to any of those. Most of the time I couldn't because of my touring schedule.
Right.
But yeah, only now that been moved back to January, it's felt like it's a good time to revisit it.
Well, I love it, man. Looking forward to it. It's always a
Thank you.
highlight for the NAMM show is coming out to the Metal Allegiance and lots of guests this year. I noticed Doc Coyle on the bill. I don't think he's performed with you guys yet, but talk about the guests you have coming out for it.
Yeah, that'll be the first time with Doc. I've known him for a long time. I've known him since he was in God Forbid. God Forbid
Yeah.
was on some festival shows with Testament, and I haven't seen him with Bad Wolves, but I've been following, and I've seen Bad Wolves has done just fantastic, and and he's also got the wedding band with the All Star group, which
Kirk
is
and
great.
Robert.
So yeah, and yeah, he's doing so much, and it's gonna be great to finally share a stage. We've actually never shared a stage before.
And usually in the past, I know in the past Metal Allegiance shows, there's been some themes here and there. Is there any sort of theme, or is it just kind of getting back to basics?
Um, yeah, usually there is a theme. I think this time we're not really doing a theme, mainly because it's the 10th anniversary of the first Metal Allegiance recording,
Right.
which came out in 2014. A little later in the year, but still same year. So I think because of that, we're really going to focus on the originals and just a few covers, and they are mostly classic covers that we've done before, but a couple new ones, but they'll be very familiar songs to everybody in the audience.
Well, I look forward to it, man. I mean, just the people that get assembled on stage and playing together, and then when there's cool stuff that happens, like at the last one where Dave Lombardo and Gary Holt were playing together and playing some Slayer tunes, or John Bush doing some Anthrax tunes with Charlie Benante. There's always some sort of little reunion spiced in throughout the Metal Allegiance set.
Yeah, those have been incredible reunions. Really epic moments that all have Metal Allegiance to thank. So I don't know if there's going to be any situation like that. I'm not aware of anybody being brought together in such a way, but it has happened before, and you never know. It could happen again.
I did want to heap some praise on some Metal Allegiance praise on you for 1 second.
Uh huh.
Most of the shows have been at the House of Blues, but one or two has been at the Grove of Anaheim. I'm pretty sure a couple years ago it was at the Grove, and I just remember you absolutely destroying in the best possible way, slaying a Prince cover and nailing the solo. Man, it sounded exactly like Prince, which was big props to you because that ain't easy to do.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was the tribute
Fallen
show that we did,
Heroes.
the Fallen Heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that was a real pleasure. And yeah, people are surprised that um, I would have enough familiarity to be able to do that. But that's I'm as much a Prince listener as anything else, and I always knew he was an incredible guitar player. But I think in the years since he's passed, so many videos have been shared of him live, doing these solos, and people can really respect what he's done. I mean, he did like Van Halen level guitar pyrotechnics and quoted Led Zeppelin, and so there was so much more to Prince. So it was a shame to have to be able to um, play a Prince song in that under those circumstances,
Yeah.
but a pleasure to pay tribute to.
Speaking of the NAMM time and paying tribute to fallen people and guitar gods, we got to talk about a couple days before the Metal Legion show and the big Leslie West tribute that you're doing for Music Cares. And talk a little bit about Leslie West as a player. He's a little bit before my time. I know Mississippi Queen, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
talk to him about his importance to guitar and playing.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled about this upcoming show. This is actually going to be my first public performance in 2024. And originally, my schedule made it impossible to do that show, but things worked out and I got added to it. And it's perfect for me because I've been a long time listener and fan of Leslie West. I first heard his name in an interview with Michael Schenker, and
Ah.
I was a big fan of Michael Schenker's guitar playing in UFO with his own Michael Schenker group and the early Scorpions. And I never knew where he got it from. I figured Jeff Beck was probably an inspiration and a little bit of Eric Clapton, but there was something else there. And he was the first one I remember mentioning Leslie West and Mountain in an interview. And that caused me to check out the music. And it immediately became apparent. I could really hear it. Just the great feel. Um, he was one of these no gimmick players. And that's nothing against players who've done really well with gimmicks and tricks and stuff, but there's no like dive bombs, there's no overuse of effects. I mean, it's just raw, just guitar, amp, overdrive, and just wonderful use of notes and riffs. And to be able to pay tribute to him is a big honor. And I think yeah, people know Mississippi Queen, but there's also so much more than that. I was also given a couple early records of his by old aging Woodstock hippie I knew at one point who would, and he was trying to tell me, this, you're listening to these Ingve and Steve Vai guys. You need to listen to this. And um, and I knew his name again from the Michael Schenker interviews, but those early records, Flowers of Evil, especially, um, just incredible playing. So beyond Mississippi Queen, like there's just deep cuts that people have no idea about. So I'm really excited.
So it's his thing is really bringing the feel to it. It sounds like more than the technicality, the Ingves and all that are blazing through the notes. A lot of feel and emotion with his playing. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, also, um, I think Eddie Van Halen had incredible feel and emotion as well. It sometimes got overshadowed by like his use of the tremolo bar and feedback and wild stuff. And similarly, Jimi Hendrix got a little bit overshadowed by the performance
Hmm.
aspect and the effects and the showmanship. And Leslie West just played, you know. He
Love it.
just played. It was just about the music and reminds me a little bit of Gary Moore.
Mm.
Gary Moore had a little bit of more speed and technique, especially in his pre-blues records. There was a whole period where he was doing records that were kind of in the vein of the Michael Schenker group. It was definitely hard rock with just screaming guitar, but never a lot of effects, never a lot of not a lot of wah or whammy bar and stuff like that. Just a Gibson through a Marshall, just pure, very pure. The to me, like all the Allman Brothers players were
Mm.
like that. From the original guys, Dickie Betts and Dwayne Allman to Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks, right? It's just pure playing, and that it's a different thing. And I like all different types of players, but I really have a special appreciation for these kind of pure players. And to me, Leslie West is the epitome of that style or that approach to playing guitar.
Well, look forward to that Music Cares event and seeing what you do out there. And want to talk a little Testament with you too. Talking about the House of Blues of Anaheim. That was the last time I got to see you on the
Uh-huh.
Bay Strikes Back tour, which was incredible, by the way. But I actually wanted to talk to you a little bit about the greatest tour that never happened. And I thought it was a really interesting bill.
Uh,
Testament and the Black Dahlia murder.
oh, I know.
That tour
I
that
know.
never happened. Like at first glance, I went, "What the?" And then I went, "Well, I love both bands." And then I started to get really excited about the idea. And then unfortunately, it never happened. But wanted to talk a little bit about that. Remember Trevor a little bit, who also had a tune on the Metal Allegiance album, on the last Metal Allegiance
Hmm.
album, and the Accuser. Curious if you had any interaction with him and your history with Trevor.
Yeah, I had a lot of interaction with Trevor. He was on the East Coast. So I'm based in New York. I moved to New York in the late '90s. So when musicians are part of the East Coast music scene, I tend to run into them more often.
Makes sense.
So I would see him around. I pretty sure I'd been introduced to him at some point, but we never really got to know each other until we needed a singer for that song, "The Accuser," and I thought he would be perfect, not for his main voice that he would do with Black Dahlia Murder, but I found sections of songs where he had this really different tone that I thought, okay, if you could take that tone and we make that the main tone for the song, I thought that it would just be a really interesting way to go about it. And he really brought his own identity to the song. And we worked together. We sent the recording back and forth. And, I would just encourage him, more of this, maybe a little less of this, even though most of it was fantastic, and just kind of give him some direction. And and then the shows we did together, he was just a, so much fun to hang out with, just a blast. So I was really looking forward to us touring together,
Yeah.
and sadly it didn't happen. Both, for for many reasons, but mainly because Trevor has left us.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll be paying tribute to him as well.
Yeah, I just figured I wanted to shine a little light on him. We're talking about all these fallen heroes, and certainly
Yeah,
he falls in that category. And certainly, a unique thing that I think that Testament is one of the few bands that could go out with a pure death metal band like that, and it makes sense, large in part to Chuck Billy's vocal delivery and style, which makes it there because the music's already just as heavy and thrashy as most deathcore bands. Is that something that you guys will maybe think about doing again in the future, going out with a death metal band, a straight up death metal band like that?
yeah, I could see that. I mean, also there's plenty of overlap,
Mhm.
even though it's different generations and different subgenres of the music. Brandon from Black Dahlia, he was one of my favorite newer generation players. He filled in with Exodus when we
Mhm.
toured with them last year and just did great. And it doesn't matter, even though Exodus is a totally different subgenre than
Right.
Black Dahlia. He fit the part, made it work, and I think on the same bill, there's no reason it wouldn't work. And I think we want to reach different people now. I think if we were to just limit the band to people who grew up listening to the band or grew up to bands that were roughly around at the same time or came out a few years before, like Anthrax,
Sure.
then we'd be really limiting the audience. And I think that the occasional shows we do when it is a different type of band. Another example is Killswitch Engage,
Oh
which we
yeah.
did some shows with them and Lamb of God, who we probably have more in common with sonically, but
Yeah.
with Killswitch, they bring a great crowd, and definitely some of those fans come on board. And also, I think the summer festival shows are a great way to just get in front of audiences that might not have grown up with this music and are more familiar with the later bands, or even different genres.
Yeah.
We've done festivals with everybody from Prophets of Rage when they were going to all Bullet for My Valentine to even last year, even old bands that have been around longer, like Motley Crue.
Hmm.
And I love crossing the boundaries and just reaching fans you might not expect. So yeah, well, I think we'll always want to do that.
And, speaking of Testament, last album was killer. Titans of Creation kind of came out talking about the pandemic, kind of came out
Yeah,
right during the pandemic, but all kind of jams on that one. Children of the Next Level, World War III, Dream Deceiver. Are we starting to get into another Testament album? I mean, you guys have kind of been on the 4-year cycle. It seems like we're due.
yeah. Well, we got delayed a little bit by the fact that 2020 basically didn't exist. It's this year
Right.
that was into went away. And then there was so much touring to make up for.
Yeah.
And for about a year of that, we had Dave Lombardo on drums, which was fantastic. And he's become a great friend and a great musician, but he's also spread very thin
Right.
in many different bands. And now we have Chris Dovas, speaking of later generation guys, and he's a guy old enough to be any of our sons, but he is just unbelievable. He really brings the right energy. I mean, he brings the energy that the music had in the early days. So, we've been working with him on new material. I know Eric's been getting together with him. Eric has been on the East Coast a couple times, and we've gotten together and hashed out material. So between their sessions and my sessions and the recordings that we have, there's a lot of sketches that are done on digital audio workstations. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff. I made a list, and there's almost a couple dozen sketches that just need to be consolidated and arranged and sort of find the best parts, develop them a little more, add vocals, but it's definitely well on its way.
You just got to do all the fine shading now.
Yeah, yeah, and you can't rush it. And this is, I think, this man learned very early on you can't rush it. Like the times in the past that the band sort of rushed to put out a recording, it's just it never felt completely satisfactory. So sometimes it takes longer than it should, but you can always count on a good result.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing of it, especially back in the day when you're on that touring cycle and you had to deliver an album. Now it's a lot easier that you can kind of take your time with it as you want. But you mentioned that in the past. Was there an album in particular that you felt was kind of rushed that you wish you had more time on?
Yes, yeah. Well,
Anyone that comes to mind?
100, yeah, so 100%. The album Souls of Black. Now the title
Oh,
track is great. Yeah, it's one of the favorite band tunes,
classic.
and yeah, yeah, and I take some pride in coming up with the intro on bass, and
Baseline.
sort of developing the next part and combining it with some parts that Eric had, and we wouldn't change anything about that song and a few other songs, but um, just that production wise, we felt like it could have been better,
Mm,
and we just felt the album as a whole could have developed a little more. It could have been a more um, monumental album had we had the time to work on it. But we were pressured. And it was one of these business situations. So we had an offer to tour with Judas Priest,
ah,
which was a huge honor, and they were playing arenas at the time. So that was our first time supporting in arenas, and by then we'd been waiting for years to have that an opportunity like that.
sure.
But the powers that be at the record label, would not allow us to tour unless we had a new record out, and they had that power. They could have just said, "Okay, here's some tour support money," even though, of course, they're going to get paid back. They
Right,
could have just given us the money and let us tour. Um, I don't want to put all the blame on Megaforce Records because we were on Megaforce, but we were also uh, distributed by Atlantic Records. So
right.
I don't know who is to blame. There was a lot of finger pointing, but they could have just said, okay, you are still on the Practice What You Preach record cycle. Here's your tour support. Goes support this record, and I think that would have been amazing. Maybe we could have done another single or something. But instead, we were told the only way this is going to happen is if you go in the studio and do a whole record, and it's a lot. There's some groups that could pull it off, but for the most part, no. So it wasn't a total loss, and we got to do the tour, and there's people who really like that album, but I know we realized that we don't work well under that kind of pressure.
They kind of, in theory, held a gun to your head. You want to go on tour with Judas Priest? We need the record.
Exactly, and it was a really short time too.
And of course, you're like, yeah, we'll get it done. We want to go tour with our legends, with the kids,
Yeah,
with the guys we grew up on.
exactly.
Well, I look forward to the new music, Alex. Last thing I got to hit you with, man. I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on this. We're an old school radio station. We do a feature called Mandatory Metallica, which you're going to be a part of.
Uh-huh.
And I've been kind of doing this little Metallica debate over the past year or so, debating the greatest Metallica album with my buddy, and we kind of come down on opposing sides. So I want to get your pick out of these two. I'm
Uh-huh.
fascinated to see where you come down. And it's Ride the Lightning versus Master of Puppets. If you had to pick out of those two, which would be your numero uno and why?
Yeah, well, as soon as you mentioned two, I mean, those are the two.
Yep.
There's no question immediately. So yeah, immediate. Yeah, you know right away it's got to be one of those two albums. Um, so yeah, it's tough. I would go with Master of Puppets just because I think they broke more. They definitely broke ground on the previous one, but they broke even more ground on this one. And I think the fact that um yeah, here it is all these years later, and the title track ended up back on the charts, even though it's thanks to a TV show. Still, to me, that says a lot. And you can just point to so many groundbreaking and very bold moves on that record, like in the title track, instead of doing a slow intro and getting heavy, like stopping in the middle of the song and say, okay, right here, it's going to become a slow song. And then it's going to build back up to the fact. I mean, that's just unbelievable and pulling it off.
Yeah, and I love the dual solo in there during that slow part because there's not a whole lot of James and Kirk playing dual leads.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's just such a memorable part. It's just very well orchestrated and great production
Yeah.
for that kind of music at the time, like unheard of. So it really pushed the music forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the sound, forget songs for a second, the sound, the recording is so much better on Master of Puppets than it was on the prior Ride the Lightning. I mean, Ride the Lightning kind of sounds like it was recorded in a bathroom at at certain points, where
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
Master of Puppets is, it feels thick. It's a full sound spectrum, and to have Welcome Home Sanitarium and Orion, and touching
Yeah.
the
Just
more
so
melodic
melodic.
stuff,
Yeah.
and then Damage Inc. and Disposable Heroes and Master of Puppets and Battery, and like they still hit you over the head just as heavy.
Yeah. Well, I think they always had this influence of film soundtracks. Moritoni is their intro music.
Right.
And I think with that album, that started to influence the music. Right.
Mm,
It just felt it had the energy of the sort of, you know, punk meets new wave of British heavy metal, but just made it cinematic.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a favorite song we could play for you on Mandatory Metallica?
Um, yeah, I guess. How about? I mean, it's not an original choice, but that one, the title track,
Master.
bring it. Yep.
Always been a blast to talk to you. Can't wait for the Metal Allegiance, and can't wait for the New Testament as well, man. Looking forward to that.
You're welcome, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.